what I'd like to do is I just want to bring up and talk about, before we dive more into the family enterprise and how that works and the three circle model, we just used a term, the family of affinity. I want to define that for people so that they understand family of affinity versus a family that's not of affinity, and what that looks like. Would you mind sharing on that?
Michael, I'd be delighted to. Let me offer this. Any family that thinks of itself as blood is almost certainly not going to flourish. Now, why do I say that? Well, because most families think of themselves somehow as blood. So why do I say they will not flourish? Well, in the biblical sense, if you build your house on sand, it's going to fall down. If you build it on rock, it's going to stand up. Or you might like the three little pigs. Better to have a brick house than one made of straw or one made of wood. What am I laughing about? Well, no family ever began with blood. It's a fallacy. Every family ever, Adam and Eve or whatever mystical families we want, always begin with two people who have an affinity. And they share no blood. As one of my great demographer friends said, Michael, many years ago, the only thing that knowing blood is good for is if you're in the emergency room and you need a transfusion. He said, that's very helpful. But he said, otherwise, it's completely fallacious. So if a family builds its journey on blood, it's building its house on sand. If it builds its house on rock, it's because it recognizes that from its inception, it's an affinity group. It's two people who have an affinity for each other. Affinity is the word in Webster's, there's, I think, 14 or 15 different definitions. It's the word in Webster for positive connection, whether it's in biology or physics or art or the humanities. And here's the really interesting thing. The very first definition of affinity in Webster's is relations of human beings other than by consanguinity, which is a very large word meaning blood. So what Webster says is that the first meaning of affinity is relations of human beings other than by blood. And when I discovered that many, many years ago, I thought, gosh, that's how families start. They start with positive connection to each other. And that connection itself is usually that of a partnership, not a joint venture. What do I mean by that? Well, as my dad taught me many, many years ago, partnerships are about giving to each other. So your daughters, congratulations to them. Your daughter and the young man or young lady today have made a decision to be each other's partners, which means they're each going to give a lot to each other. Joint ventures and families, by the way, that are constituted as joint ventures are about getting something from each other, and they all fail. They fail the affinity principle. So that's a lot of words, but that's exactly what I've seen. Those families that start understanding we are an affinity community, we're a partner community about giving to each other, helping each other flourish, do very well.
Thank you. No, that's great. And it's funny, as I've gone through, it is a really, in the day and age that we're in today, I think that's a hard concept sometimes for people, or it's a very easy concept. I don't think there's a lot of middle ground, and for many families, it's, the idea of everything that we created in this family stays together, but I see a lot of that, and that does make it very difficult when bringing in that new knowledge from the external side, as some people would call the outlaws or the in-laws. And the flip.
Michael, let me add something here. I didn't mean to speak over you.
Oh, you're okay.
The interesting thing about married-ins, which I think is a lovely term because it's pretty much descriptive, uh, is that they are the only people who choose us.
That's right.
If
Everybody
you,
else wasn't a choice.
if a family wants to get rid of hubris of blood, if it's still stuck there, and it wants to get to affinity, it can get there fast by asking that person, why would you choose a crazy bunch like us? So the married-ins have a particular deep awareness because they're objective to some extent.
Sure.
They're making a conscious choice to join. And that principle is the affinity principle, because they'll say something like, well, I love you. I like you. You're good. I enjoy being part here. There's something going on here that's positively attracting to me, not just my relationship to the one person, but all of you.
Right. And it's funny because, and I just want to reiterate one more time for those that just joined us, we were talking about the difference between a family of affinity and a family of blood. And what Jay said, at the beginning was every family is a family of affinity at one point. So if you're 3 generations down the road with the family business, somewhere along the lines, your grandparents chose to marry each other and start that family. And they did it because they had an affinity for one another.
Yeah.
And so there was no blood at that point. It was just the blood from that point forward, their descendants forward. That's really interesting, Jay.
And avoiding fallacy can be very useful.
Agreed. So